Okay, let's just jump right in. We want you to imagine, for a moment, that the entire political structure you use to define yourself, your left or right identity, is not built on coherent, stable philosophical ground.
Right.
What if those ideas you hold so dear are actually just tribal signals? And what if that whole spectrum is actively making you confused and hostile?
That's a huge intervention. It's a challenge that, if you really accept it, it requires a fundamental rewiring of how most of us view the political world.
And that foundational challenge is The Engine Driving the Myth of Left and Right by Verlan and Hyrum Lewis. Their central argument is that the labels left and right are just these shifting tribal markers.
Well, that's totally shifting.
And they bundle otherwise totally unrelated policy positions, not because of some deep ideology, but because of social conformity.
They're really targeting politically attentive Americans, the people who use these labels all the time. The authors are saying the intense polarization we see now is dominated by this thinking, and they want to dislodge that entire model.
And we've spent a lot of time with this book, so enjoy this extended analysis. It's more than just a summary, which we also have, but this really examines how the authors shape their argument, build influence, and earn or maybe lose your trust.
It gives you the tools to read with sharper insight.
Should you read this book? This should help. It's also excellent for any aspiring writers out there.
And just to set the stage, the authors are conservative-leaning academics. They're trained in history and constitutional studies, and they're published by Oxford University Press. So they're bringing some serious scholarly ethos to the table here.
A quick technical note before we go deeper. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation. It's powered by Google's Notebook LM, which lets us get into a more dynamic analysis for you.
Okay, let's get into their core argument. It's actually really elegant in its simplicity. They frame the whole thing around two competing theories.
The two theories that structure the entire book.
Precisely. So the first is the one most people just implicitly buy into, the essentialist theory. This is the idea they reject.
And this is the belief that a bundle of policies, say abortion rights, higher taxes, pacifism, they all derive from one single stable principle.
Exactly. Like a fundamental commitment to equality or the collective good. The idea that it all logically flows from one place.
So if you believe in one, you must believe in the others.
That's the belief.
Yeah.
But they reject that completely. Instead, they argue for what they call the social theory.
Okay.
And this claim says those policy bundles emerge purely from, well, tribal conformity. You join a team, you adopt its positions to fit in, and only afterward do you invent the story about why it's all philosophically coherent.
That invention of the story later, that's post hoc rationalization. Could you unpack that a little? Because that's such a powerful concept.
Absolutely. So an essentialist believes their philosophy led them to their policies. The authors say the opposite is true. You adopted the policies socially, then you crafted a philosophy to justify them.
It's like finding a group of friends who all wear blue shoes and red hats. So you start doing it too, and then you write an essay about why blue and red are a perfect philosophical match.
That's a perfect analogy. The team came first, the reason came second.
And this is where the book makes its strongest logical move. It turns the political spectrum itself into the thing that needs to be explained.
The explanation.
Right. So instead of asking, what is the left, they're asking, why do we even think there is a coherent left at all?
It's a brilliant reframing. It immediately challenges your self-understanding. It says, that thing you think is your bedrock philosophy is actually a cultural phenomenon we need to analyze.
But doesn't that risk being, I don't know, a little too cynical? If it's all just random social pressure, what are the real-world implications of that?
Well, the authors argue it has huge implications for compromise. If you believe the essentialist theory, you just assume the other side is built on a coherent but evil or stupid worldview.
Greed or socialism or something.
Right. But if you accept the social theory, you start to realize that many people on the other side might actually share principles with you. They're just trapped in a different tribal bundle. And that realization could open a path to understanding.
Okay, let's shift into the rhetorical analysis then, how they actually build this case and earn our trust. They start with their ethos, their credentials.
The academic affiliations, Oxford University Press, that all signals scholarly rigor right from the start.
But their credibility, I think, really gets a boost from what you could call an insider critique.
Yes. They're conservative-leaning, but they make it crystal clear that this tribalism, this rationalization, it operates across all camps. They critique their own side, which positions them as honest contrarians, not just partisans.
And that honesty lets them use their strongest logical tool, historical instability. They lean so heavily on these, well, shocking historical shifts to show how nonsensical the spectrum is over time.
Oh, absolutely. They don't just state it, they detail these massive party reversals. Think about trade policy. For decades, the Democratic Party was the party of protectionism tariffs to protect labor.
And Republicans were for free trade.
And today, that's almost entirely flipped. The populist right champions tariffs, while the Democratic establishment leans more towards international agreements.
Or foreign policy, that's an even crazier shift. In the early 20th century, the party of isolationism was.
The Republican Party, for the most part.
Yeah.
And Democrats under Wilson and FDR were the interventionists. After World War II, the parties largely swapped places. When you see foundational issues like race, trade, foreign policy flip like that, it just destroys the idea of a stable essence.
And they don't just rely on these historical stories. They supplement that narrative with references to survey data.
Which is crucial.
It is, because the data suggests that in modern politics, adopting your team's position matters way more than independent reasoning. You align first, then you justify later.
And that brings us to the emotional core of the book, its pathos. They use some very vivid, almost alarmist language. They argue that spectrum thinking makes citizens, and I'm quoting, confused, hostile, and cognitively impaired.
They want you to feel alarmed about the mental cost of clinging to this old model. That language is powerful, but we have to talk about the risk in their tone.
Yes, the prose can turn pretty caustic. They dismiss entire intellectual traditions as nonsense or meaningless.
So what's the effect of that?
Well, that sharp tone really galvanizes readers who are already fed up with polarization. It makes them feel seen, but it also risks alienating the very people whose identities are tied to those ideologies. If you call someone's philosophy nonsense, they're probably not going to listen to the rest of your argument.
But couldn't you argue that tone is necessary? I mean, if you're trying to dislodge an identity people hold dear, maybe a gentle suggestion just won't cut it. Maybe you need that shock.
It definitely serves a shock function, no doubt. But it leads right into the main limitation that critics point to. By insisting that ideologies are, and this is their phrase, number 100% tribal, they might be overstating their case.
So they risk underplaying genuine, principled commitments that activists and thinkers really do hold. Not everyone is just a blind follower.
Exactly. The argument can feel a bit too sweeping. They set up a false binary between pure philosophy and pure tribe. And they kind of miss the messy reality in the middle where both are interacting.
It flattens a lot of meaningful differences.
I think everyone listening, though, can probably think of a time they realized they disliked a politician not for their policies, but just because of the jersey they were wearing. That feeling is what the authors are dissecting.
That moment of recognition, that's the key takeaway they want you to have.
Shifting your frustration from rival philosophy to rival tribe.
And if you're enjoying this rigorous breakdown of rhetoric and argument, you might want to spend some mindful moments with our YouTube channel. We offer AI, book analysis, summaries, and critiques, all to inspire reflection and rational thought.
Now, getting back to the book's style, it is very didactic. It really favors these clear, schematic contrasts, philosophy versus tribe, and it uses a ton of repetition to hammer that central thesis home.
That repetition makes the claim stick, for sure, but it can get a little tedious in the middle chapters. You feel like you're hearing the same core idea applied to yet another historical example.
It can. But despite that, the overall structure is really effective. It moves from clarifying the concepts to historical illustration, and then finally to practical application.
Which is what people want. It addresses that need for actionable knowledge. Okay, the spectrum is a myth, so what do I do now?
Exactly, and that leads to their concrete prescription for how to improve our discourse. They suggest 3 main reforms.
What are they?
First, more granular issue-based discussions. We have to stop people from just adopting the whole tribal bundle. Talk about a specific tax bracket, not just lower taxes.
So instead of asking, what does my team think about trade, you force yourself to ask, what do I personally think about this specific complex deal?
Precisely. The second reform is promoting what's called adversarial collaboration.
Sounds interesting.
It's the idea that opposing sides should work together to design studies or debates, agreeing on the rules and metrics beforehand. It's about genuinely testing ideas, not just scoring points.
That sounds great in a lab, but incredibly difficult in, say, the U.S. Congress.
They admit it's hard, but they frame it as a cultural shift we need to aim for. And that connects to their third prescription. Just cultivating intellectual humility.
And that really is the ultimate value for you, the reader. The book is incredibly effective at destabilizing that casual liberal versus conservative talk. It makes you question if that binary really captures the complexity of your own views.
It gives you a new vocabulary.
It absolutely does. The authors make a compelling case that our political categories are just far more fluid, more socially constructed, and more damaging than we tend to realize.
So what does this all mean for you? We've looked at how they use ethos, pathos, and history to build their influence and challenge a really fundamental assumption.
And the final provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. If ideology is primarily a social act of conformity, how much of your own political frustration is really directed at rival tribespeople you just don't like, rather than rival philosophies you actually disagree with?
That is a powerful question.
It is. Click the link on screen for the in-depth book summary. And please subscribe, share, and purchase via the link. And think rationally.
See the many genre-based book shows at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.